Hello, how are you going?
Hi. Good. How are you, Georgie?
That's good. Good, I'm good, thank you. Hey, Sue, how are you?
Hi Georgie. Hi, Catherine. Hello.
Hi.
Amazing. Well, I think
We better just wait and see how are they coming across. Can you actually see?
Yeah, I can see the participants. I might give everyone a few more minutes just to come back on, and then we can get started with the Q&A.
Okay.
And for everyone who's already on, if you have any questions, feel free to just put it in the chat message area, or there's a little Q&A button at the bottom of the screen that you're more than welcome to use as well. Okay, I may get going and then people can just log on and join as we go. But welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone enjoyed the film, and I have no doubts that everyone did. I'm so incredibly thankful that I've got the opportunity to talk to both Sue and Catherine tonight about the Brazen Hussies film. I watched it, I think, a few days ago now, and I fell in love with like activism and advocacy all again. It's really sparked my motivation and passion I have for that, which was dwindling during COVID, but I was definitely a fan, as most people definitely would be. And so thank you so much for being involved in the Q&A tonight. And a massive congratulations for being nominated for the Best Feature Documentary category in the 2020 Australian Academy of Cinema and Television Arts Awards. That is so amazing. Well done. That is
Thank you.
Impressive. Very, very impressive. And so inspiring and motivated. And this documentary came at a very needed time. And so I'll just begin as well. And as a proud Bundjalung woman, I'll just begin by acknowledging the Turrbal and Yagra people, who are the traditional custodians of the land of which I'm currently on tonight here in Brisbane. And I pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. And I might just give a short little synopsis for those who may not have yet watched the film and who are going to go back in the next 24 hours, as the link is still there. But Brazen Hussies revealed to us a revolutionary chapter in Australian history, the women's liberation movement, which was from 1965 to 1975. And your team uncovered archival footage, personal photographs, memorabilia, and treasured personal accounts from activists. It showed us how daring and diverse groups of women joined forces to defy the status quo, demand equality, and create profound social change, contributing to one of the greatest social movements of the 20th century. And I'll just introduce myself before I move on to introducing Catherine and Sue. I am Georgie, as you probably already know, and I am facilitating this Q&A. I'm a member of the YWCA and also part of their CBF group. I'm very passionate about women's empowerment, and I really am getting more into film and sort of capturing the moments that are happening around us. I was recently involved in creating the YWCA's Black Lives Matter little video montage that we did. I captured the protests here in Brisbane, and we had other people capturing Sydney, Melbourne, and wherever they were happening across the nation. And I got this passion from my mum, who was an ABC camerawoman when she was pregnant with me. And she is very passionate. She's all for being independent. She loves stirring the crowd, asking questions that people don't really want to be asked. And that's what I've really learned from her. And that's where my passion is sparked. And I continue to build upon that, learning through my own experiences. And again, I'm very thankful to be given the opportunity to speak to you two ladies. And I'll just go through and introduce you first, Catherine. So Catherine is a first-time director and was inspired to make the film about the history of the women's movement in Australia through her experience of working as an associate producer, post-production researcher, and assistant editor on Mary's critically acclaimed and award-winning documentary, She's Beautiful When She's Angry, which came out in 2014, which was about the US story of about the story of the US's women's liberation movement. And Catherine was also the impact producer on The Freedom Stories, which was directed by Stephen Thomas in 2016, a documentary that explores the achievements and stories of former boat people who arrived in Australian waters seeking asylum. You've done so much already within the advocacy and film spaces, and I'm so looking forward to diving into that very, very shortly. And I'll move on to Sue. As many of you would probably recognize Sue's name, she's one of Australia's most successful film, television, and digital content producers, creating award-winning feature films and documentaries, including The Dressmaker, which we had like a pre-meeting this morning, and I was saying that was actually a film that my mum took me to when I think it came out
really young.
Yeah, when I was really young. And I remember sitting in like the Gold Coast Casino where it was filmed and listening to the Q&A there. So it's just a bit surreal to be now facilitating a Q&A. So that's very, very cool and a personal thing for me. So that is definitely cool. And that grossed more than 20 million at the box office and got the highest number of nominations at the 2015 Australian Academy Awards, winning 5, including the People's Choice Award for Favourite Australian Film. And Sue's contributed 35 years to the Australian screen industry and has received the Jill Rubb Award for Outstanding Leadership, Achievement and Service to the Victorian Screen Industry. And Sue was also inducted into the Victorian Honour Roll of Women in 2018, as well as being appointed an Officer of the Order of Australia in 2019 for distinguished service to the Australian film industry as a producer and through her roles with professional bodies. And again, I'm so incredibly honoured to be facilitating the discussion tonight with you two ladies. And thank you again so much for joining. And I'll just quickly say again, if anyone has any questions for all those people who have just joined us, feel free to add it into the chat box or in the question and answer box, and we'll get to that. And so now I'll get into the question and answers. After I've done a lot of speaking, I'm very sorry. But
thanks for that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really, really wonderful to be here, online with so many women from the YWCA. I feel very, very honoured that you've all watched the film tonight.
Yeah, definitely. And I think everyone was so thankful to be able to watch the film. So I might just start off with and ask a very general question, but what was your inspiration and motivation for creating this film, and what drew you to producing, to directing the film? Do you have any sort of personal connection or personal experiences that really drove you to creating this?
Yeah, thanks so much, Georgie. And I'd just like to start by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you on the lands of the Wiradjuri people of the Kulin Nation here in Melbourne, and as is Sue over in Fairfield. And, I'd like to acknowledge that their lands have never been ceded, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. What inspired me to make the film was an encounter I had with a friend of mine who, when she heard me say that I was a feminist, she said, "What? You're a feminist, but I want to have children and stay at home to raise them, and feminists are against that." And I was just shocked to my core that that's what she thought feminism meant. And I couldn't believe someone my own age would think that. Of course, I've always been raised to believe that feminists are about having the choice to do what you want with your life and having a wide range of options. So it made me very curious about why feminism was becoming a dirty word, and why, like, I knew that there was a second wave women's movement, but I felt like it was getting forgotten and lost. And that experience led me to working on the film in America, She's Beautiful When She's Angry, which was an amazing experience, and I learned so much. And Mary Dorr was such an inspiration to me. She just sort of mentored me, and I learned so much about making historical documentaries and so much about the women's movement, and just all of the way that different issues intersected with the term feminism. So I kept wondering, I know it happened in Australia, but I don't know who was involved, what it was like here. So I decided to come home and find out. And then I met Sue at a dressmaker screening through the Women in Film and Television. And she had seen She's Beautiful When She's Angry play at the Melbourne Film Festival. And I believe she said she liked it. And I said I'd like to make the Australian version now. and she took me seriously and met me for a drink to discuss how I could do it. And because she took me seriously, I actually had to do it. And if it wasn't for Sue, I don't think I would have.
But I thought it was just amazing that a young woman of, Catherine's age was interested to ask what happened all those years ago. And I'm old enough to have been around and politicised by the feminist movement in the sort of mid to late 70s. And so many of, the women who drove the second wave of the feminist movement, their stories had not been told. And Catherine was absolutely right. Why hadn't we heard these stories? Why hadn't all of the fantastic archival footage really been brought together to be able to tell this story? So it was just wonderful that Catherine had the energy, and it took 5 years, Catherine? It's been a long journey.
Yeah,
absolutely
it was
phenomenal.
5 years ago that we met at the dressmaker screening, I think.
Yeah, indeed.
That is so amazing, and I'm so thankful that you guys made that connection, and then that film came out of that connection. Like, very, very thankful. And so you were talking about it capturing and sort of bringing back to life the past movement that's already happened. Why do you think that's so important? Why do you think it's so important to put on film and recognize the work and the advocacy that women before us have already completed?
It's so important to know this history. Isn't there that saying, if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it? Mm-hmm. So, but it's also important to see that women do make history. I think, the way that stories get told about Australian history, you'd think that women didn't make history. And, in fact, we did. And if we're not careful, these histories can easily get forgotten. And then you get told that women didn't do anything. Well, actually, we did. And we can learn from past battles, and we can be empowered by how change is made. It's so important to know in detail how change gets made. It doesn't just happen. It's usually fought for by the people it matters to most.
And the fact that the change can be made by a small group, it started off, as grassroots, a small group of women, and that grassroots movement just grew and grew and grew across, so many different fronts. So I think it's a kind of a real message for our times, and it's an inspiration that we have so many things that, in our culture right now that people can sort of turn away and feel utterly powerless about. But actually, activism, comes with, shared values and community values and standing together. And when you do stand together, then anything's possible, as these women, were able to show.
Yeah. And what I really appreciated within the film is that you acknowledged, and all the storytellers throughout the film acknowledged the difficulty initially of women trusting other women, because I think that was something that I know still happens in today's society. And I think it's something that is really important for us to overcome, is trusting other women and empowering other women in order to better our future. And so why do you think, or could you maybe expand upon, why do you think women are reluctant to trust other women? Or actually, no, I might just leave it at that. Why are people sort of reluctant to trust other women initially? And why is it important for us to empower one another in order to progress?
Yeah, well, I think a common saying in the women's movement in the 70s was that sisterhood is powerful. And it really is. Of course, once you start to unpack the women's movement, you start to question, well, when you say sisterhood, who are you talking about exactly? Are you talking about all women? But I still think that the term sisterhood is powerful, holds a lot of strength. And I would hope that it is easier to trust other women today than it was then. I mean, like Anne Summers, I think, says in the film, you were socialized to compete with women for men, and your aim in life was to find a husband because that's what tied you to society, and not yourself. And I think, I don't know. I mean, I guess people still get married. I don't believe in the institution myself, but there's just so much strength and what's the word I'm trying to think of? Just so much strength and exhilaration that you can get from your sisters when you get together.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can see it in the film, just that kind of high that the women got, and they started just hanging out together and hanging out in women-only spaces, and not sort of being encumbered by what I call the male gaze, or just expectations of femininity when men are around.
Yeah,
it was so freeing. It was so exciting. I don't know. I hope today, like, women are free to go out and dance together in nightclubs. I think things have really changed, but we also still have a long way to go.
Yeah, no, we definitely do. But that was just, a really interesting point that I really appreciated in the film, and something that I don't constantly think about. But again, I really appreciate having all my girlfriends around me. And I think that different dynamic when you're only surrounded by women is so different to when you're in like a space with men, women, people of different genders. Like, I definitely understand the empowerment you can get when you surround yourself with women who are also empowered. So that was really, really cool. And I may just move to a question from one of our audience members. They would love to know a bit more about the research process. So would you be able to expand a little about the process and all the research that was undertaken throughout the film?
Yes. Where did I begin?
Big question.
I actually began with a book called Getting Equal by the historian Marilyn Lake, and she'd written a history of feminism in Australia, and that was a great way to start. It's a fabulous book. And I just started Googling, I started writing down names, I started connecting the dots, and I've had 5 years to make it, so that's a lot of time to gather a lot of material. But the archives were so important, and I really have to stress how much I appreciate librarians and archivists that make this stuff accessible, because it's so valuable. And again, like, women's history is not valued, so it's the women themselves that have kept these archives and ensure that they have been donated to libraries. And then in terms of like the footage, we had access to the ABC archives, which was just amazing. But we scoured everywhere we could: the NSSA, Channel 7, Channel 9, and many women in the film are actually filmmakers themselves, so I could draw on their work, which was like perfect. And it's so great to see the women then and now as well.
That was definitely very cool.
But yeah, I mean, it's thanks to the historians that have started to write these histories that I was able to draw on. And one other thing is oral histories were incredible, and I got them from the National Library of Australia in Canberra. They've got a really great oral history collection.
And then you uncovered, amazing things that nobody had seen before, including the women. And I'm thinking of the ASIO footage, for instance.
That's true. We found Sigrid Thornton in the ASIO footage. That was very exciting.
How does that even happen? Like, how do you, I don't know whether this is just a very like silly question, but how do you even get access to that?
Well, it's available. The ASIO records are available through the National Archives.
Okay.
But they just collected so much material. They didn't do anything with it. They just collected surveillance of any people in the left wing in the Communist Party. They just surveilled them and kept records, didn't actually analyze it or anything. And so there's a small amount catalogued at the National Archives, and there's like just probably rooms full of uncatalogued reports still to be discovered.
Like a treasure.
But yeah, it's kind of like being a detective. Once you get a lead, you just follow it and you can't stop. I love it.
I'm very, very glad you love it. It came across in your film. Like, definitely you can see your passion for it. And I may move through to another question. So what drove you to focus on second wave feminism specifically?
Well, my mother is a feminist, and she's the same age as a lot of the women in the film. She wasn't in the women's liberation movement, but she definitely was somebody who believes strongly in the movement and was empowered by it to sort of seek a career and take opportunities that previous generations in her family hadn't. And like a lot of the women in the film, she came from a working class background and was the first in her generation to go to university, which is interesting of the time. It was a time of prosperity. And yeah, it was just that feeling that people were not remembering that there was a really significant social movement that happened in the 60s and 70s, and people were just forgetting that it even happened.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, very cool. And another question from Jess, who's in the audience. You highlighted the idea of raising consciousness, and this is something that she hadn't heard of before in relation to the feminists and women's movements. So had you heard of it before? And she continues to say that it felt like it was an essential part of women's liberation.
Yeah, it was a huge, huge part of women's liberation. It was a huge catalyst. And it's where women discovered that the personal is political. Women's lives were considered part of the private sphere of being in the home. And because women weren't socialized to hang out with each other, they were socialized to find a man and marry and have babies, and were quite isolated. Women discovered this, shared, they discovered that their experiences of isolation and oppression were shared. And there wasn't, they were discovering that it wasn't a personal problem, that they didn't fit into be this feminine mold that they were supposed to fit into because they were women. Other women felt the same way that they did, and it was huge. This was a time when women didn't gather all that much in public places. Public bars were not considered places where women could be, so we weren't even considered part of the public. So that's why it was just so huge. And no, I hadn't heard of consciousness raising before. I learned about it in the American film, and yeah, it really is one of the most powerful things. And then to harness that and see that it's a political problem that should be addressed by society, and go out and demand the society.
I got to attend many conscious raising groups. In fact, it was a regular fixture, really. If you were part of the women's movement, then conscious raising was just there, as something that you joined in. And over time, you would begin to build trust, with the other women in the group who you might not have. I didn't know anybody, in the particular groups that I started going to originally, but you gradually, nothing was off limits. We talked about all of it, the politics, what the current issues were at the time, our bodies. We started looking at our bodies in ways that we'd never looked at our bodies before. It was utterly liberating, and at times terrifying as well, because there was some pretty, solid home truths, that were coming out. But it was ultimately about self-discovery and seeing yourself within the broader political system, within the patriarchy, and life-changing, really. I thoroughly recommend it. I think young women should get into conscious raising now. It's amazing what you can sort through.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it definitely is. And throughout the film, when it was touched on sexuality and empowerment in the forms of your body, and really recognizing, looking at your own body, which women hadn't done until that time. Why did you guys address that? What did you think was so important about women's sexuality and owning your body, looking at your body, recognizing what it does, and knowing that it's not only there for the male gaze? Why was that so important to capture within the documentary?
Well, it was really such an important thing in the second wave women's movement was the body. It was very rooted in the body, and that women didn't know about their own bodies. They didn't know how they work. They didn't know about contraception, and they didn't have control over their bodies. So, the way that women were reclaiming their own sexuality was huge. the sexual revolution came along, and women discovered that they were having all this sex, but it wasn't actually all that enjoyable. They learned how to enjoy sex, and
there's so much fear as well, because sex was equated with the fear of pregnancy, because you have to go back to the late 60s. Contraception was not available to women who are not married. Abortion was illegal. There was just so much fear around sex and pregnancy. There was a lot that was sort of opening up at the same time. It's hard to imagine now.
Yeah, I think it's one of the probably the most different, how much things have changed. I've never had to worry about that, and that is because of the women's movement. And we just live such freer lives now because of that.
Yeah.
So it's not perfect.
Yeah, that was exactly me watching the film. I think I became very complacent in myself with things like that, like the pill, we can just go get prescribed without any worries. And it's something that I think I didn't really acknowledge the women's work who had done everything before me. It's something I just took for granted. And that's what I absolutely loved about this film. It put everything back into perspective for me and really showed me what I do take for granted and what I shouldn't take for granted. So that was something that I'm extremely thankful that the film taught me. And I have no doubt it was a lot of the people who have viewed it and who are going to view it will think the exact same. And
that's wonderful. That's exactly what we hoped would happen.
Yeah, and without a doubt, even the things that women weren't allowed in public bars, it could not compute in my head. The word public was used when it was not for the public. And that entire segment of the women chaining themselves to the bars and physically getting thrown out of the bars just astounded me. And I could not believe that happened. And it didn't happen even that long ago, which was what was even crazier. And so when you would, sorry.
I was going to say that footage of the women getting thrown out of the bar was probably one of the most amazing finds that we made.
Yeah.
Searching through the archives. It's just incredibly powerful.
Oh, it was watching it. I could not believe my eyes. And so when you guys were sort of finding all this footage and researching and fact finding, going through that entire process, was there one thing that really stood out to you that shocked you about the movement, or something that you really took away from the second wave feminist movement?
Well, something that didn't make it into the film, but I'd like to still explore how we tell it, was that something, and this is all to do with control of our bodies, is that something that women in Sydney, and I'm sure it was happening around Australia, the women in the women's movement were doing, was fighting to close the Parramatta Girls' Home, because young girls who were under 16, I think, could be arrested and taken off the street for being in moral danger, which means that they are in danger of having sex. So they'd be arrested, put into girls' homes, and made to do manual labor, and given virginity tests by doctors, so an actual pelvic examination to see if they were virgins, which is completely medically unsound and doesn't make any sense, but it was happening. And a beautiful woman called Bessie Guthrie, who was in her 60s, turned up to the Women's Liberation Centre one day and said to the young women who'd started it, "I've been waiting for you girls all my life." And she had been campaigning on her own for 20 years to try and get these girls' homes closed. And the young women joined her, and they were successful. They were hugely successful in, they got the ABC to do an expose on the schools. They got virginity testing stopped, and the schools were eventually closed down. And it blew me away. I mean, these poor girls and what they'd been through was just, and for doing nothing except for being girls,
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that system continued in Queensland right up to the mid-80s, because it was another film I was involved in 83 called Open Tantrum. Yep. And girls, young women were still being locked up for being in moral danger. So it was appalling.
I can't believe that. That actually like physically gave me the shivers just thinking about, like, it just seems so surreal. And that's, again, like, I struggle to comprehend that even happened, that people think that way. It blows my mind. But you both were very determined to create this film with predominantly female identifying or non-binary crew. And so why was this so important to you?
Because I believe in jobs for women, like your mother,
Yes,
who was amazing camera woman. Georgie had some photographs of her mother pregnant with her while she's operating a camera. I'm just so inspired by those photos. You must be so proud.
I am very, very proud of her. Very.
And I mean, I have to say, I loved, I've always loved film, but it doesn't necessarily always feel that accessible as a woman it's not in an industry where it's a lot easier to be a man. And what I found was using feminist networks like Women in Film and Television, where I met Sue, and connecting with other women. I just wanted to work with women, and I think it's important that we help each other get jobs.
The producers of the film, Philippa Campy and Andrea Foxworthy, both of whom are terrific documentary producers, I think all of us were really committed to working collaboratively. So, and that is something women are really good at doing. So I think that collaborative process, which has continued the whole way through, and then of course with editor Rosie Jones, that is the real strength of Brazen Hussies. That commitment, to working in that way has really, driven this film and now the release.
Plus, I have to say there was just a magic feeling in the room when we did interviews, and it was all women crew, and it was the interviewee telling their story. It just created a really magical space for sharing.
Yeah, I think it would be so cool to sit in a room like that. I would have loved to be like a little fly in the wall when you guys were doing all this prep for the film. I think it just would have been so cool to witness. And so moving into the new age we're living in with like social media and digital everything basically at the moment, how do you guys see that positively impacting women's movements or possibly negatively impacting the women's movement?
That's a tough one. I think with every new technology, there's good and bad. And I think we're definitely seeing that with social media. I think something that's really incredible with social media is the way that it's been able to connect like Aboriginal communities in a way that mainstream media does not tell Aboriginal stories. And they're getting to tell their stories and share their stories so easily where mainstream media has ignored them. And I think that's just incredible. It's also really, helped with activism, but at the same time, it's creating a lot of misinformation and fake news. So I think it's difficult to say. And I think, I really value these Zoom discussions as well. They're so fantastic for connecting with people all over Australia. But I do appreciate like the consciousness raising meetings that the women were doing in the 70s, the face-to-face. It's really important to connect with people in real life and step away from the computer as well. What do you think, Sue?
Yeah, look, I just see it as a tool, and like any tool, it can be used, for better or for worse. But applied to networking, it's phenomenally powerful, and applied to when you've got a really powerful idea, as indeed, Catherine and the filmmakers have had with this film, then your desire is to connect with audiences as far and wide as possible. And that's the beauty of social media and online networking, that we can do that. I mean, we're in the middle of right now releasing a film on Thursday nationally, and Catherine and I and Pip and Andrea and the rest of the team, we've all been working from our living rooms, and that's where we're sitting. Now that would be unheard of. 5 years ago it would have been impossible. So we're we are working across all platforms, and the one great thing about women is that we're pretty good at networking. We get the word out. So, to that end, yes, social media has been a real benefit. I just worry about it in terms of the isolation and the anxiety that it can still engender, particularly in women, and the trolling that goes on, and the negative, the negative feedback that women often get if they are public, about their views. So that is a real worry, and just we just have to support each other.
I'm curious to know if anybody has experienced online trolling. I mean, I'm lucky not to now yet, nothing serious, but it does. I mean, it's always in the back of our minds that you just never know.
Yeah. And I think, again, you've got to there's always going to be someone out there with a different opinion, no matter what is right or what is wrong. And I think that is something that's going to become really persistent within the future, especially being online, is that people are going to become a lot more comfortable with sharing their opinions because they've got a screen in front of them. They're not having that face-to-face conversation, which again, I think will make trolling become a lot more popular. But also, I think it's such a great opportunity for women to come together again, and people of all different genders to really support one another and realign the mentality that we have against certain views or certain opinions, and really try and understand them before we criticize them. So I think, social media will definitely be a tool, but we just have to ensure that everyone's using it wisely. I may quickly run over to a question within the Q&A. I'll just read it. Recently, on a well-known Australian dating show, the lead male was asked by a contestant's mother if he was a feminist. I don't know whether you guys, I'm pretty sure this was The Bachelor or something. Was it The Bachelor? I'm pretty sure. So this was
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, I'll quickly finish. This was posed as a controversial question on modern television, as the male struggled to answer yes. Why do you think people, such as your friend Catherine, such as you, have such a skewed understanding of what it is to be a feminist in modern Australia? And do you think the media plays an important role in people's understanding of feminism? It's a bit of a loaded question.
So why my friend thought feminism was a dirty word, and so I'm afraid I don't keep up with reality TV shows, but they are an interesting, can't think of the word. They bring a lot of contemporary social issues to light. I mean, the media does a lot to, I'm thinking about how the media disparaged it in the film, and they were just it was so amusing to see how blatantly sexist they could be then, and how I guess I would hope that things are better now, but if the media is dominated by men and run by men, then they're going to be sexist. So we need more women on our screens and having opinions.
I think part of the problem is that all of us, men and women alike, are engendered to look at the world through the eyes of men. That is the default position in the way that stories are told, who are the key characters, where the emphasis lies, all of it. And then gradually, by having more women who get to tell stories and to be able to show, the complexity and the depth and the interest, really, that women's stories can bring to the screen, we'll start to build a culture where we can equally, but differently, start to look through the lens together, men and women. And that's really what it's about, ultimately, is just, recognising that, women have every bit as much, value in this society as men do. And women have to really take that on board just as much as men, and to own that space and feel comfortable in that space. We count, we matter, different but equal.
I'm definitely going to look up this situation with the reality show. It sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
I love it when a woman like Shane Gould, for instance, wins Survivor. I mean, just through, her strength as a woman. That probably does more for, feminism in reality TV than most, but I wouldn't necessarily go to reality TV to be, find your politics as a feminist.
Yeah, I mean, what Sue just said reminded me of a line in the film I Am Not Your Negro, which is about James Baldwin, and it's basically James Baldwin's writing in a film, and he's talking about growing up watching Hollywood films and realizing, watching Cowboys and Indians, that he wasn't the cowboy, he was the Indian. And that it says about white people, we've watched you our entire life, so you better know yourself. And I just got goosebumps, and it just was so powerful. And in a very similar way, that's what it's like to be a woman consuming stories, always the side character, not the main character. And we need to consume stories from other people and get other points of view, and not it just be white men's stories.
Yeah, definitely. And you guys within your film have encapsulated exactly that, and I'm so thankful that you guys have paved the way for people like myself and people who want to do exactly what you've done and build upon that, to really come forth and be comfortable coming forth and having people to look up to. Like, it's really inspiring. So I thank you both. And we've got another question. It says, one of the listeners' mums had to resign as a teacher in 1966 because she got married. Did you see much of this in making the film?
Yes, that is a really great point to bring up. And I think you asked me this morning if I had any regrets. And I mean, I have so many regrets. There's so many stories that could be told. But when Mel Thornton chained herself to the Regatta bar in Brisbane, that was just the beginning of her fight. And what she went on to do was to fight to end the marriage bar, which was the law that said women in the public service had to resign, were deemed resigned upon marriage. And that was just in the law, and it was changed basically. I mean, she campaigned for a year, and then the law was changed in 1966 for women in the public service. I think that included teachers, but yeah, it set the standard. And just that's pretty huge, that you can't have a job because you're married.
I think it's one of the things that we just really want to communicate to young women, how all of the things that you take for granted now, all of them had to be fought for. Yeah. I mean, if you've rewound what it was like, in the mid-60s when the film starts, it'd be like looking at an episode of Handmaid's Tale. It's, just all of the laws and the draconian ways in which women's lives were controlled, and all of them had to be fought against.
And just that feeling that you're supposed to accept that, and this is, what your place is. And then to find other women that didn't accept that either and were willing to do something. I mean, it's huge. That's why I wanted to make the film, because it really excites me when a group of people stand up and say, no, the world can be different.
It's so extremely powerful. And I have that exact belief. I don't understand how in any point in time women could have been seen as less than a man or anything but equal. It just honestly astounds me. And I'm so thankful for everyone who fought for our current rights and fought for what we have right now, because if it wasn't for them, I don't know where we would be. And I'm so happy that I'm one of those people, along with you both and probably all of our listeners, who are actively trying to build upon their work and not over it, not trying to reverse it, just build upon it. So that's extremely important.
We need to be aware. We just have to look at what's happening in the United States of America, very, very divided country at the moment, how a number of issues, ranging from obviously abortion through to many aspects of, women's sort of status and well-being are now going to be challenged, going forward. So it's these things are not set in stone. We can never take these for granted.
Yeah.
And it's like I said, I never would have done this if Sue hadn't taken me seriously. And I never would have believed that I could do it on my own. But it was, by working with other women that that empowered me to do it. So, you know, if you ever doubt that you can't do something, just find somebody else and do it together.
It's more fun that way.
Yeah.
Oh. And so we've got another question from Jessica. How did you come up with the title for the film?
We thought about it for a little while, but it didn't take too long. I don't know about someone like you, Georgie, but have you familiar with the term Brazen Hussies? Brazen Hussy?
I wasn't until this film. I hadn't heard it before.
I mean, it's something that, maybe my grandma said to me, but it's something that's definitely not used anymore. And but it was very common back in the day to call any woman who spoke out or was loud or brash a brazen hussy. And it's not really used anymore because of the success of the women's movement. I mean, it's just absurd to, it's not an insult. It's something to be proud of if you get called a brazen hussy today, I think. So the power has been taken out of the term, but it was used to silence women, and it was reclaimed by the women's movement. So there was a band in Adelaide called the Shameless Hussies, and they have a song called Shameless Hussies. And there was a feminist press in San Francisco called Shameless Hussy, and a woman from the women's movement, Jean Taylor in Melbourne, she wrote a history of the Victorian women's liberation movement called Brazen Hussies. So that's where we found the name, and we got her blessing to call the film that.
That's very cool. I'm glad I know that backstory now as well. So we've got another question. Did any of the women in the film have reservations about participating? And did their kids and grandkids know about their role that they played?
That's a great question. No, most of the women were really pretty on board to be in the film, and glad to be asked to tell their story. Mel Thornton is Sigrid Thornton's mother, and Sigrid's a well-known Australian actress, and she's also got a granddaughter, and Mel's got a granddaughter, and they're all very proud. I would hope that they would know what their grandmothers did. Some of them were hard to track down. Facebook has been amazing for finding a lot of the women, but like someone like Alva Gecki and Lennox, who teamed up with Zelda towards the start of the film. I was just so lucky to find an old phone number and call her up and find her living in Lennox Head in New South Wales. Because I didn't even know she was alive still. So that was really, really thrilling. And then chasing up Kate Jennings, the poet that gave the incredible speech. Yeah. She now lives in New York, so that was a real coup to track her down and get her to tell her story. I did want to interview Marcia Langton because she was in a collective of Aboriginal women, and she was at that conference at the end, the big sort of climax. Unfortunately, she's a very busy woman, so I wasn't able to track her down. But other than that,
next time,
yeah,
next time. And so, on sort of following from that note, in the future, and how do you both perceive the feminist movement and women's empowerment and equality in the future sort of travel between and alongside movements like the Black Lives Matter movement and all these different intersections, where I know it was touched on in the film that not everyone can give 100% of their energy to women's empowerment when there's Black Lives Matter movements going on and that's their main focus. So how do you both sort of, in your own opinion, in your own personal way, see the future of that movement moving alongside all the different intersections?
Well, one of the things, sorry, after you, Catherine.
Oh, you go through.
I think that the thing that is really clear now is the need for us to listen to each other and for there to be some, there are so many ways in which we can be divided, and tragically at the moment there's divisions going on between the feminist movement, the intersectional movement, transgender movement, and there's a lot of discussion going on, I think, where we're all really dealing with the same thing, and that is the power structures in the broader society that leave some people powerless, and we've got to keep our sights on that and understand where the real enemies lie, where the real challenges lie, and actually find ways to listen to each other and work together towards that, rather than allowing ourselves to be divided. I think that is the really fundamental challenge going forward. And with tolerance, and I'm pleased to say a greater focus on diversity now in all of its forms, that has just been the most spectacular growth movement really of the last few years, and it's just getting stronger. It'll lead, I think, to a more diverse culture, more diverse ways of engaging between communities, as long as we don't shut ourselves down and we do not enter into the kind of cancel culture that closes voices down.
Great answer.
Yeah, I would echo that fully. And I'll move on, to another question. So what, for you both, is the biggest lesson that you've learned through making this film? A big one. Or it could be
biggest lesson. Well, I mean, I'm constantly surprised that we did it, that we pulled it off. So the biggest lesson is you can do it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I suppose, I mean, the other lesson is keep archives, keep your records, because they're so precious, and you may not think they're important now, but they really are.
Yeah.
History is so important to save that stuff.
Yeah.
I think the biggest lesson for me was, no matter how disruptive this year has been and how impossible COVID and the Melbourne lockdowns have been, this film actually got made, and Catherine and the team just kept going, and that COVID's not enough to shut down women who are on a mission, and in this case a mission to make this film. So it was quite an extraordinary thing actually to see this film completed at a time when none of those participants, the collaboration I was talking about, could actually physically be in the same room with each other for most of the time. And then not only for the film to be finished that way, but now for us to release right around the country. And there's 10 of us who are working together right now, all in different parts of the country, connected via Zoom. So the real lesson is that anything is possible where there's a will and a determination driven by a powerful idea and a desire to connect with people.
Yeah, I think that came through within just watching the movie as well. And so it sort of comes into one of my final questions, just very conscious of time, is when you were creating this film, I imagine you both had a lot of emotions running back and forth, like between anger, frustration, surprise, motivation, whatever other emotions you could possibly have. How did you really use your emotions to the benefit? And in situations where you found things extremely frustrated or extremely enraging, how do you use that to put or move that passion back into the film? And if that makes sense.
Well, that's interesting that you say that, because I was asked earlier how we managed to just wrangle a huge amount of footage and archives. And the thing that my amazing editor she was very ruthless with the cutting room floor, and she basically, if it didn't have any emotion in it, we cut it, because I mean it can easily be a dry history, a very dry history of dates and facts and wage discrepancy percentages, and so it was like emotion had to be at the core of every scene, really. And if it didn't resonate emotionally, then we had to cut it, because it doesn't matter how interesting a story is, if it doesn't connect emotionally, I don't think people will connect with it. So and that was hard. It was really challenging to do, but I did know, I mean, what was driving me was this outrage that people didn't know, that things weren't always the way they are today. And so I knew that once we assembled it all together, it would show a pretty illuminating portrait of society. I just noticed that there was another question that I wanted to answer before we finish, and it's from, should I read it out or should you, Georgie?
Okay, yes. Okay, so she appreciated the inclusion of Aboriginal women's stories and perspectives in the film. But she was just wondering why there's few women of colour represented or telling their story in this film.
Mm-hmm. And that's a great question. And it is true that it was a predominantly white movement, and the Aboriginal women questioned whether it was where they should put their energies at the time. I know that at the time, in the ferment of the times of the 60s and 70s, there was a lot going on. There was anti-Springbok rallies against apartheid in South Africa. A lot of the sort of people in the film were definitely, believed in anti-racism and Aboriginal rights, but they didn't necessarily know how to. Well, look, there were a lot of attempts made, like to migrant women. They would put out publications for equal pay in Greek and Italian, but it was really hard to get like migrant women involved at the time. I mean, their lives at the time they were doing the double day, factory work and at home. So there did become more involvement with migrant women and women of color sort of later, like after 1975, and there became migrant women's working centres. But yeah, attempts were made, but it just took a while for I think a lot of the white women to understand the gap in experience. That migrant women and Aboriginal women's experiences were different from their own. They didn't have the same problems. They had different concerns. And I would recommend a film that has just been released, and it's called Women of Steel. And it's an amazing story of migrant women fighting for the right to work at BHP in Wollongong. It was an epic battle. It's a big David and Goliath story, and it's made by some of the women who were in the women's movement. So I highly recommend that one.
That's very cool, and it was going to be added to my list. I haven't heard of that one before. And maybe I would love to hear just one piece of advice that both you ladies have to perhaps like budding filmmakers or people who are really trying to reignite their activism. Do you guys have any key pieces of advice for them?
I just really encourage anybody who has an idea that they want to be able to make a screen work around, to know what is it they want to say and who it is that they want to say it to. If they can just be really clear on those two things, then and have the passion to tell that story, then just go for it, get started, because that passion and that clarity is going to be an attractor and bring others to join you in making it possible. Don't ever underestimate and think, oh, well, nobody else will be interested necessarily, or it's too expensive or too hard or take too long. Every film is a journey, and it just starts with that first step. But if you've got the clarity and you've got the passion, and the desire to connect with other people, then you have the access to means of production. I mean, we're looking at it, we're using it on our phones, we've all got access to it now. So just get started and do it. That's how I did it with my very first film, and it also took 5 years, Catherine. In fact, it might have even been a bit longer. And it was a documentary, and it was about women, and I'd never made a film before, and I just started, and like you, was able to have so many incredible women make it possible to have happen, and that was nearly 40 years ago now. So you've got a long way to go and lots of films ahead of you, which is very exciting.
I'd say that's absolutely true, and it worked for me. And yeah, I mean, just if you have a good idea, go for it.
Stick to it. Oh, amazing advice. And thank you both so much again for joining us. And on behalf of YWCA, we're so thankful that you guys have created this film, and we're looking forward to everyone seeing it, all the listeners. We can find you on social media. You're on Instagram, Facebook, and you've got your website, which is brazenhussies.com.au from memory. That's correct. And it comes out nationally on Thursday. So I encourage everyone listening to tell your friends, families, boyfriends, girlfriends, whoever, to go and watch a film and support it. It's so amazing, as you guys all know. And again, thank you both so much. We really appreciate your chat tonight.
Thanks so much, Georgie.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much, YWCA.
No worries. And thank you to all our attendees joining. We really appreciate it, and all your questions.
Great questions. Thank you.
Definitely.
Okay.